Hi everyone, Anders Ibsen, candidate for Tacoma Mayor, lifelong Tacoma resident and a former City Council member as well. I have served from 2012 to 2019. Big supporter of transit, obviously. We're an urban center. It's a cornerstone of what people need to not just get from point A to point B, but it's also how our neighborhoods relate to each other and how we can tie everything together and build opportunity and equity. That's something I was really passionate about during my time on the City Council, working on everything interrelated from worker justice issues to housing affordability policy. And if you can't get somewhere, then none of those things matter. And that's what I think the crucial work of organizations like Downtown on the Go really provide. It was such a privilege working with them and with other transit advocacy and other environmental and other advocacy groups. And it's something I'm really passionate about learning more of and working alongside you. Really excited to be writing the link as well. A little personal privilege. My son is a big trainaholic. So just for funsies, we just ride the train sometimes. That's literally all he cares about. And so it's kind of cool to come here and just see where the action is and what more we can do together. The answer is yes. In fact, I supported its original iteration back in 2013 when I was previously on the City Council. I helped design some of the funding of it. And how I would market it is because a lot of people at the door have expressed a lot of confusion about what it really meant. I think a lot of the failure at the ballot box had to do, in some part, with
train to St. Joseph.
A need for greater clarity on what you're actually getting for it. For example, a lot of people thought of it as a tax increase versus the reauthorization, for example. So
the doors are closing.
A lot of it was a failure of basic messaging. But also, in some respects, ironically, I think it didn't go big enough. I had a great conversation with someone from Tacoma the other day about why aren't we thinking in terms of passageways to things, right, in the spirit of greater connectivity. So instead of just simply patching X amounts of streets, which doesn't really mean anything to the average person, right? But if you think of successful funding partnerships like Safe Routes to Schools, for example, people have an intuitive understanding about what that means. Like this is going to make kids safer when they're walking to schools, for example. I'd really love to explore the concept of safe routes to parks, by the way, because they're just so interrelated and that there's such a huge equity implication to that too. But I think that's part of it. It's just a greater idea about what it is and what people are getting also. And in some respects, it's also just a failure of storytelling. Because what I always tell people is that when you go to a nonprofit event, when you go to, say, the Tacoma Community House or the YWCA, when they talk about their work, it's always in the context of a life who's been transformed. You know, a sympathetic figure had a hard luck story, and these services made this person do much better. Here's them telling their story, and we've helped X amount of people just like that person. We're winning. Don't you want to help us win more and help even more people, right? How does the public sector make the case for funding? We're broke. And I don't know where the money went, but we want more of it, right? At least that's the perception. So I think a lot of people I talk to, like a lot of very liberal people who are generally pretty inclined to support these things, voted no. I think that's pretty indicative. I think it had less to do with a tax revolt or even the obvious explanations like inflation or just budget consciousness or whatever. I think we just need to tell our story better, and we need to do a better job of showing people what the return on investment is. Just be as specific as possible and not everything to everyone. To being back during my prior term on the City Council, and at the highest level, what I'd say is we need to actually follow our already stated policies. And a really good comparison, since you brought up the South End, which I agree, it's with all the people in all the different neighborhoods I've spoken to, it's so disgraceful that you can guess by Google Street View what neighborhood in Tacoma you're in by does it have sidewalks, does it have trees, right? That should not be the case. But since we're talking about the South End, compare kind of a tale of two neighborhood centers. Compare the Lincoln District versus the 6th Avenue District, right? One is extremely walkable and the other is on its way, but still has some barriers, right? I mean, Lincoln District, I was there and we did the Lincoln Revitalization Project. We did, I think, some great improvements. Might have very well laid the way for the new Starbucks, for example, for the Patsy Sir apartments, greater utilization of the space like the Lunar New Year Festival. I mean, Lincoln's really coming together, right? But one of the key differences between what could be much greater actualization of that space is the lanes. So if you compare 6th Avenue from, say, Alder to Sprague, you compare the Lincoln District proper, 6th Ave is just a single lane each side. It's designed for greater pedestrian utilization. Lincoln is still a freeway
This is
neighborhood.
an outbound
It's still-
train to St. Joseph.
It's still a neighborhood that feels and walks and looks like this is an exit you take off of I-5. And the double lane, the larger width, it's not conducive to that kind of engagement that we need. And so we've had this conversation time and time again, whether it's streets like North 21st Street or others, or the streetscapes on Pac Ave. And we actually need to follow through in our policies and what we already know works, which is design. That's how we make things safer. It's not, enforcement matters, right? But it's not about putting a bike cop on every corner. It's not about,
The doors are closing.
it's not about policing and enforcing every which way all the time. It's about designing the environments that we want to see for the behavior, right? And so actually following through on our policies, actually following through on things like green roads and pervious pavements, and actually just making sure that we're being as methodical as possible, especially in high return areas like neighborhood mixed use centers, areas that are coming together.
Next
And
stop is Theater
something that's
District.
equally pertinent for the city
There is
council
no
and the
eating
mayor
on the train.
is
Please do not place
making
your
hiring
feet on the
decisions
seat.
for key positions like the city manager, department directors, and just ensuring that there's a good culture of city staff who get it and who understand these policies, are enthusiastic about them, who are willing and energetic partners with community organizations like yours. I think that's probably the most crucial step, actually, is just getting great staff who are true believers, who really know their stuff, and who want to follow through on policy we already have. Sure. So there's long-term and short-term, right? The longer-term projects, the longer-term funding streams have everything to do with economic development potential and working with our state and federal delegation, especially in today's era of constrained and frankly weaponized federal funding. We have to be as creative as possible, and that also includes being smart about our debt. Can we be more inventive with how we manage everything from debt service and defeasance and as many tools as we can, both current as well as existing. So we shouldn't just be limited to the tools we have. In the short term, we have this neat thing called the Transportation Benefit District. So examining all the options there for both physical infrastructure as well as services like transit. But ultimately, what I'm really looking at in terms of how we prioritize what we have, which is the other aspect, and that is marrying systems as much as possible. So we have a very recently ambitiously passed land use code called Home in Tacoma, which is all about incentivizing more housing choices to deal with the affordability crisis. And a very big cardinal pillar of Home in Tacoma was transit corridors. It was all about getting greater density, getting greater mixed income housing, greater opportunities for people in and going towards downtown and mixed use centers. So in terms of not just the additional revenue options, but what can we do with the limited resources we have and get the greatest multiplier effect with grant money, with utility funding, with everything else, is just getting the highest return projects, which I would think would involve housing opportunities and people's ability to have 15-minute communities, because that's the dream. And especially in an area of scarcity, I mean, that's what we have to do now more than ever, is just smart partnerships and greater systems thinking to get more of what we want in terms of transportation and land use. Sure. So devil's in the details, obviously. I am more inclined to support a transit ballot measure for something that's more urban, that's more focused on the proper city limits. I'm frankly a bit less wild about something countywide, just because we are underfunded and we are under-resourced compared to neighboring counties. We're also way, frankly, less responsibly planned than a lot of them. I mean, Pierce County is the reason why we have the Growth Management Act, for example, whereas King County, the others have tended to fall in line more with the actual intent of that law. And so as a result, that means our transit system outside of urban areas is extremely inefficient. So I was actually having a conversation at the door with someone in northeast Tacoma, right, which is Tacoma proper, but it's some people consider almost a colony of Federal Way, right, in terms of how they feel and the level of connection. And this was a person who lived around Browns Point Boulevard who said, I live across from a bus stop and I work downtown. I would actually like to take the bus to go to work, but for me to do so, I would have to basically spend 3 hours of my life first going to a Federal Way transit center and then going to someplace else, then going to Commerce, then going to my job on Tacoma Avenue, right? And so we really have to have more of a strategic conversation before we ask the revenue question, just like with the roads measure, which is, do we want to be everything to everyone, or do we want to have some focus, especially when there's greater scarcity of resources, when there's greater, frankly, political weaponization of federal funding, which informs state funding as well. So I would have to see the specifics, obviously. I don't want to shoot from the hip about making commitments. I like my commitments to mean something. But my overall inclination is to be more supportive of something that's focused on an urban area like Tacoma, because one, we can actually deliver much better service that makes measurable improvements to people's lives. We can actually align them with our housing goals and our land use goals for home in Tacoma. And we can also marry it to our transportation benefit district, which has different sales tax options, for example, among others, for things like transit and other improvements. So again, I'm not opening or closing the door one way or another. I'd have to see the text, but that's my overall inclination, just given our constraints, but also given where we can do the most good for the most people.
Next stop.
One is broken record, but making sure that we're delivering the greatest connectivity between the areas that have been upzoned through home in Tacoma, as well as our downtown core and our mixed-use centers, so that we're thinking of transportation less in a silo and more as a connective tissue between all these amazing parts of town. So making sure that we're actually delivering on our policy goals of creating 15-minute communities, which isn't just about getting from point A to point B faster, but it's also about public safety, right? I mean, safety isn't just about responding to crime with force. It's just as much about making neighborhoods livable, and it's also about removing decades of inequity between neighborhoods. I mean, you shouldn't be able to tell what Tacoma neighborhood you're in on Google Street View based on, does it have sidewalks, does it have trees? There should be access to that opportunity for every neighborhood. And so actually just delivering on our policy goals in a streamlined and savvy way, which is also, I think, the most fiscally prudent way, because therein lies the best grant money as well, is one. More specifically, in one of our neighborhoods, I'd really like to have a conversation again about bus rapid transit. I think that conversation and where it went was very self-inflicted. As someone who's spoken with many of those neighbors in that neighborhood as part of this campaign, I think there was actually a lot of openness to it, but from what I had heard, it was conducted kind of in the opposite way. I mean, when we think of bus rapid transit, and we think of just partnering that with the real concerns, the public safety concerns people have there with, say, drag racing, for example, which is a very recurring problem in a lot of neighborhoods, but especially state highways like Pack Ave, for example. If we could marry those goals of getting fantastic, convenient, fast, safe transit access from the Lincoln District all the way to Spanaway and all the people who live and work down that corridor, maybe upzoning it further, or at least aligning home in Tacoma and additional housing goals to those improvements, narrowing the street instead of widening it, so that instead of having people on the defense about a perceived taking, that they can get behind something that slows down cars, enhances the safety, get some green space, some more tree canopy, some vegetation, some rain gardens, so we're improving our water quality, helping the salmon. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to slice it, but I think that there could be an appetite if it's done properly and it's done more inclusively. To make it not just transportation, to bake into the DNA of the city as an organization, as a culture, that transportation is as vital to housing as to clean air and water, as to economic opportunity, as food and air and water and sleep are integral to being a human and living, right? I want us to abandon silos and ego, and to the greatest extent possible, just think in terms of smart, holistic, inclusive systems. I also want us to have greater focus, so that we're not trying to be everything to everyone and trying to have 50 bajillion different priorities, but maybe one or two really amazing things that we get done in an expedited time. And with the focus, especially with the failure of ballot measures like the streets measure or even the fire levy before that we're really restoring trust. And from all my conversations I've had in the community, it's actually not that complicated. We just have to do very visible, tangible things that measurably improve people's lives. And if we're just smart and inclusive and we empower the good-hearted people to do their jobs well, and we just give them a very clear idea about what it means to win and just get out of their way, then I think we can achieve those things. And I think political capital is additive. It's not zero-sum. I think the more you do, the more you can do. And having the appreciation for the nuance and the policy, but also, frankly, a bunch of healthy skepticism too, right? I mean, we need that kind of energy to not be content with the status quo, because the status quo has failed people for so long, and it's prevented our city from becoming great instead of just okay. I love Tacoma. This is my lifelong home. I always tell people I love Tacoma like a family member. You know, I'm full of adoration and frustration, basically. And I've seen how far we've come as a kid who went to Stadium my first year, and it's the pulp mill, right? Smelled the aroma, and seen that go on its way. Seen what's happened on the waterfront, what's happened in some parts of our downtown. I've also seen issues like what's happened with housing instability and just the continued lack of leadership and results on things that so many people in neighborhoods care about. And I'm not proposing that the city council, the mayor, that the city government can be superheroes and just do everything overnight. But can we innovate? Can we move the needle in a reliable way that can be scaled up and other people can learn from, and that we can learn from others, and that measurably improves people's lives in a tangible way so as to build support for even grander, even more innovative, crazy stuff? Absolutely. Count me in.